Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Institute of Coaching CoachX Conversations. My name is Jeffrey Hull. I'm the Director of Education at the Institute of Coaching, an affiliate of McLean Hospital and Harvard Medical School. And I am really excited to be kicking off our new initiative called CoachX Conversations. And I have with me here today a wonderful guest, a good friend of the Institute of Coaching, Dr. Jacinta Jiménez, and she has an amazing new book out called The Burnout Fix: Overcome Overwhelm, Beat Busy, Sustain Success in the New World of Work. Dr. Jiménez is an executive coach. She's a psychologist trained at Stanford. She was recently the head of coaching for a new platform and a large global network of coaches called Better Up. And we are thrilled to have her with us here today, with me here today. I feel honored to have you here to discuss a topic that I think is one that's near and dear to all of us right now, and certainly very relevant to what we're all experiencing in the disrupted world that continues. We thought it was going to be short term. It's turned out to be a little bit more than that. So our goal here with these conversations is to learn a little bit about our thought leaders and the practices that have led to the book. And I'm really excited to welcome you all and to take your comments. We'll try to get to as many questions as you share with us. So please, in the comments, say hello and let us know what you're thinking and where you are. We're excited to be kicking this off. So I want to welcome you, Dr. Jiménez.
Thank you. I am so excited to be here. This is my first LinkedIn Live, so really thrilled.
And this is my first time hosting one, so I am thrilled to have you with us. So let's get started with a question that I think is on everyone's mind. Why burnout? And why did you write the book Burnout Fix?
Great start. This is a great place to start. So when I was writing this book, I had no idea we were going to be hit with a global pandemic. I had no idea what 2020 was going to bring, that our lives literally across the globe were going to be impacted profoundly, that our psychological resources or reserves were going to be taxed slowly but surely over time as we endured this pandemic. But what I did know when I was when thinking about writing this book, was that I was seeing a growing trend of burnout in both in my coaching practice and the people I work with, but also in the literature. And I was also seeing this other piece emerging where people were wanting more and more from the work. They were no longer willing to idly accept burnout or chronic workplace stress as part of being a modern day human. And so I kept seeing people say, no, I want my workplace to emphasize well-being. And so I started to reflect more on this gap between what's happening and what people are wanting. And, I got pretty concerned because, I live and breathe in Silicon Valley. I'm here in San Francisco. I've worked in technology for almost a decade now. And I can say firsthand, with advent of technology, the world in general and the world of work is changing at unprecedented rates. And they're not slowing down. So we're entering into this really different new world and world of work. But many of us in our organizations we exist in are hanging on to outdated formulas of what it takes to be and remain successful in work. And I really believe a new world of work necessitates new or different ways to approach work. And so I felt this pressing need to write this because I think now more than ever as well, we need leaders and individuals across all industries, across the globe, to ensure that as we innovate, as we create new technology, as we work to solve really big, heavy problems like climate change, racial justice, ethical tech, that we don't lose our humanity and our vitality along the way, because when we have more empathy, when we have more vibrancy, when we have more centeredness in ourselves, we are able to come up with more innovative and impactful solutions. So it's been a labor of love. I think the other thing is that I just wanted to send a message that emphasizes that science actually shows us that when we have these things, if we have resilience, we actually do better work, that the things go hand in hand. And so I wanted to write something that was about action, not reaction. So if you think about the title, The Burnout Fix, if you look it up in the dictionary, actually means to make firm, stable, or stationary. So it's a play on words. It's not about a quick fix. It's about giving people a fixed set of these core capabilities to keep them grounded and firm and fixed and stable while the world of work and life continues to evolve around us. So I'm excited, and I can't believe it's coming out during this time. And I just desperately hope it helps people find new formulas, because I think a lot of us, including myself, are feeling the heaviness of, what the pandemic has brought on us.
No, I so totally appreciate that. And I think it's interesting, because what's a silver lining maybe of this opportunity that we have to talk about these topics, as I'm seeing the folks coming in and they're saying hello, I'm noting that there's folks, and I'm sure a lot of them are leaders or coaches, because the Institute of Coaching is really globally dedicated to building the scientific, the evidence-based underpinnings of coaching as a profession. And I just want to note that, we have folks saying hi from Brussels, from Portugal, from London. Oh my God, from all over the world. San Diego, Croatia, welcome, from Italy, Canada, South Africa. So, and what's interesting about that is the silver lining of this is that this pandemic and this disruption that we're all experiencing is global. Mm-hmm. And we can come together as a community of coaches, as a community of leaders, and with your people like yourself as a community of scientists to really make a difference. So, I think it's really timely that this book came out and that you put the scientific research into a package. I've had an opportunity to read the book in a way that was accessible and practical for folks. So I think it's actually really great timing. I want to encourage folks, you're saying hi from all over the world, so I'm going to come up with more questions, but please feel free to drop a question in the comment box, and we'll see if we can get to some of the questions from the audience. In the meantime, my next question for you is to talk a little bit more about the book, and then we'll sort of switch gears, and because I want to learn about you and your journey. But I think it's valuable for folks to hear some of the key takeaways, because there's some good research in your book, and you summarize it in a way that gives them not only the scientific underpinnings, but some practical approaches. And I think there's like 3 key takeaways. So maybe you want to share some of that with the audience.
Yeah. And thanks, Jeff, for mentioning that. I really wanted to make it practical. I feel like I wanted to be the person that connects the dots between the science and practical application, because that's where I sit as a coach, is really taking what we know from incredible, researchers and pioneers in the field of burnout, such as Christina Maslach, and translating that into practical application. But the 3 main takeaways that I hope folks get from my work is that, 1, burnout just isn't simply a consequence of overwork. I think that mainstream media, for better for worse, has kind of simplified burnout, and we kind of think of it in these like very umbrella terms of, oh, you overworked yourself and so you got exhausted and you burned out. And yes, overwork and exhaustion are part of burnout, but it's much more complex than that. There's actually 6 research-backed mismatches. Burnout comes from when our capacities as a human are misaligned with the nature of our work. And when those things become out of alignment, that's where problems happen. And when you think about how complex and how ever-changing the nature of our work is, it's no surprise that this gap is growing. So to know the 6 mismatches, to understand that burnout also shows up in different ways for different people, and there's 3 core components: exhaustion, cynicism, and efficacy. And knowing all of these things, I think, emphasizes that burnout is a complex problem. And when we have complex problems, we need multifaceted, integrative solutions. And so that's why I wanted to develop kind of a framework both for individuals, teams, and organizations to look at burnout through this more granular lens so they can be more effective in addressing it. I think the second thing I wanted to emphasize in my work is that, we have to be careful, and I say this to my clients a lot, to not live on the edge.
Good point.
We can't think of resilience and well-being as an afterthought or a nice to have anymore. It is a core component. Along with working hard and smart work, we also have to actively and proactively invest in pro-resilience skills, mindsets, and behaviors. So I use this analogy. It's kind of a funny one when working with clients, tied to the edge, where we imagine if you're walking along a path, your journey, right? And you're on this cliff. and you're working really hard to endure the journey, and you're also working smart to navigate yourself. But a gust of wind or adversity comes, and you not get knocked off the cliff because you're right on the edge. You're going to sustain injuries, but not only that, you're going to have to heal from the injuries and climb back up to the top of the cliff to keep going on your path. Now, if you have a buffer, you're kind of in from the cliff a little bit. So if the gust of wind knocks you over, maybe you get a scraped up knee, but you can get up and dust yourself off and continue on your path. That's the difference between having this buffer of pro-resilience skills in your toolkit. And then the third thing, you'll probably hear me say this a lot, even in today's LinkedIn Live, is that, serious work in a serious time is not at odds with rest, replenishment, vitality, or well-being. Again, the two go hand in hand. And the more we have peace and centeredness in ourselves, the better we show up in everything we do to our communities, our families, our spouses, our teams, our organizations, our customers. Everyone ultimately benefits. And if we can do this, at a global scale, and coaches are also sharing this message and doing this work, I think the world will be a better place. And that's the silver lining, I think, of COVID.
Yeah, no, I absolutely couldn't agree with you more. There's an opportunity, right?
Yeah.
In the disruption, there's always an opportunity for us to grow, for us to learn, and for us to take advantage to be able to bounce back and not go through these same kinds of things again with the same fear or the same results.
Mm-hmm.
I am getting a quick, you said them so fast, and I just want you to go back. There were three specific terms you used: exhaustion. What were those terms? People are asking.
The three components of burnout are,
right?
Yeah, exhaustion. So really not being able to replenish yourself even after you go on vacation or take some time off. It's a deep sense of exhaustion.
Yeah.
The other one is cynicism. So this is like really heartbreaking for people who are really highly engaged in their work and start really questioning their company's mission, not wanting to be bothered by colleagues, just really not bought in as much, or wanting to get out of there, not as engaged. And then the last one is inefficacy, where you just, even though you're capable of it, you're in the throes of burnout, you don't feel like you can make progress on your work, where you're not performing at the way you used to. And that feeling is really, really tough for folks to sit with. And then when these three components come together, so if you think of it like a Venn diagram, that's where burnout happens. And the interesting thing is people can have distinct burnout profiles. So someone could have really high levels of cynicism. Another person may have higher levels of inefficacy. So it's going to show up differently across different industries and with different people. And so it's important to know how it's showing up for you, because you may not feel exhausted, even though everyone thinks of exhaustion and burnout. Maybe you're feeling a lot of cynicism, and so more than exhaustion. So really paying attention to those three components is very, very important.
That's great, because that's also really helpful for coaches. I mean, I think a large majority of our audience are coaches or leaders who aspire to be coaches or do a lot of coaching. And I think having that tuning in with your radar as a coach to what's going on with the other person in those categories can be really helpful.
Yeah, it's
perhaps you can switch gears and quickly summarize, because I know you also have the other end of the equation in your book, beautifully described, but maybe briefly, you call it the 3 R's. Right?
Yes,
which is the antidote, I guess you could say, to burnout. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. So the 3 R's that I talk about in my webinar are recognize. So how to recognize burnout, because burnout is not an on and off switch. It doesn't just happen. It creeps up slowly. And if we're not actively monitoring for it, I should say, the better we are at monitoring for it, the better we are at catching it sooner than later and having the psychological resources and energy to do something about it. The second one is respond. So how to respond to burnout. Again, if we think of it in blanket terms like, oh, I just overworked and so I need to stop working as much, we're only giving ourselves one type of solution when really there's 6 mismatches. So it's about fairness. Do you feel like there's fairness on the job in terms of promotions or dispute resolutions? The second one is workload, right? Control and resources to do the work in the time that you need to meet your deadline. The third one is a breakdown in community. So not feeling like connected or feeling like you belong, inclusion. The fourth one is a values conflict. This is really heavy, where the company, you feel like it's doing something ethically, or your boss or your manager is asking you to do something that's not tied to your values. And then the other one is reward. So people want to make progress. They want to be rewarded for their efforts. It's not just financial, but social and intrinsic reward. And if that's not getting met, that's going to erode on someone's energy and psychological resources as well. And then the last one is control. So if you're able to identify across those six, and either as a leader or as a coach, go, okay, it's because of X, Y, and Z, then let's think about solutions tied to those specific reasons that are perpetuating your burnout. And across the organization, the employee experience, what are you hearing from your people the most? Is it workload, or is it values, or is it community? And so you can get much more specific, much more granular, and much more targeted in your approach. And then the third R is replenish. And that's what the book is about really building out this buffer of pro-resilient skills, mindsets, and behaviors to keep you fixed and stable and vibrant while doing important and complex and difficult work.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, what I love about this is that for coaches or leaders who are doing coaching with their folks, taking it apart, it's like pulling back the onion. And because this term burnout has such, as you've pointed out to me in other conversations, it can have a negative connotation. Some type A's, those of us that are achievers, we run away from that term. We're like, oh, we're great. We're not burned out. So I think that there's an opportunity in your work to incorporate sort of a deeper dive for coaches and for leaders to explore different categories. It could be places where maybe somebody's not completely burned out, but they have challenges, or they have breakdown, or they have concerns, or they show up in ways that are actually hurting their productivity. And it may not really look like burnout. It may be much more subtle. So that's what I love about the way you've created this framework.
Yes.
It's really great.
Yeah, it's really about proactive risk management to help catch it before people are in the throes of burnout.
Right. No, it's great. So it's incredible how fast this time is going, and I am not going to let you get away without talking a little bit about yourself. So, I just we have a couple of great questions from the audience, but before we do that, if we have time, I'd just love to hear a little bit of your story and how you came to this subject. And, what have you ever been burned out yourself?
Yeah. Oh, great question. Yes, I have been burned out. So I've done a lot of reading and review of research and synthesizing and working with people who have been burned out, but I have also been burned out myself. So, and I talk about these personal stories in my book because I wanted to emphasize that burnout does not discriminate. It's seen across industries. It's seen across seniority. It's seen everywhere. And so even a psychologist can burn out. And I've actually been one of those lucky people that have burned out twice in their career. So I had to get, someone who has to learn by getting it twice to really learn. But I'll talk
the third time's a charm, right?
Yeah, hopefully not. 2 times a charm. But I'll talk about my first burnout experience. I was quite young, so I never thought I was going to be a psychologist. I had no idea. I wanted to be a dancer and was very passionate about dance. Studied, I had found Martha Graham. She is considered like the godmother of modern dance in a world where there was a lot of male choreographers and people were dancing kind of in a certain way. Martha Graham came in and challenged the world to kind of think differently. And if you're familiar with the Steve Jobs, this Genius Apple campaign of Think Different, he has MLK, he has Gandhi, he has Amelia Earhart. Martha Graham was one of those. And so I saw Martha and I go, I want to be like her. I want to challenge people to think differently through the arts. And so I was fortunate enough to study under 2 soloists who directly worked with Martha Graham. I auditioned and was able to live in the Fordham University dorms in New York and study at the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater. And I was loving it. But I mistook motion for meaning. And what I mean by that is I thought that my ability to endure and persist beyond every obstacle I was faced was a reflection of my commitment to my craft and my passion for dance. So I danced, no joke, through a broken jaw. I danced through mononucleosis. I danced through concussions. I danced through injuries, and I literally danced my way right into burnout. And it was a really painful, humbling and confusing experience for me. I had to leave a dream behind that I had loved so much, and was really caught off guard. I had no backup plan. And I started to think, like, how could I go from loving something so passionately to feeling disconnected from it? And it's eventually what kind of led me to starting my whole career over again in psychology, studying motivation, behavior change, and peak performance. And my first class as an undergraduate was with Hans Steiner on the psychology of sport and performing arts, and I was hooked. But I still feel heartbroken about it. Like, I deferred a dream, and I just don't want anyone who is really passionate about making an impact in the world, whether it's in the arts, whether it's in science, whether it's in tech, have to defer their dreams or stumble or flounder along the way. So it's definitely an area that I care much about and have experienced firsthand.
No, I can totally appreciate that, because I think that there's many of us that, maybe started out in the arts or started out with a passion. And, it's an interesting paradox, I think, and especially you can make a comparison with entrepreneurs, right?
Yes.
That it's often the fuel of our passion that actually leads us to winding up in the situation where we're dancing with broken toes, or,
Yes.
we're sleeping under the desk, or whatever it is. And so it's such an interesting paradox, because when you're fully committed and passionate and creative, and you're like operating in your full human capacity, that's actually when you're probably most at risk of losing sight of taking care of yourself, or going over the edge that your body, your brain is farther along than your body's willing or able to go. So it's a wonderful story. I mean, I'm sorry to hear. I have a lot of empathy for you, and but look where it brought you. So it's such a gift that you can bring that to the world. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, and you're so right, Jeff, about that piece. Like, I had to learn that resilience is about how you recharge and replenish, not how you endure. And taking care of yourself is taking care of the very tool that you need to make an impact on the world. And that was a huge shift for me in terms of rethinking about what it means to be committed and passionate about your work.
That's beautiful. It's a beautiful reframing.
Mm-hmm.
And also it's a sign of resilience, right? Mm-hmm. It's like a lot of coaches are studying and working with what's called post-traumatic growth rather than post-traumatic stress syndrome. And a lot of that, as you point out, is about taking what has been hurtful or what has been challenging for us and turning it into a growth opportunity. So it's a great example. I'm going to ask you, we have just a couple more minutes, but I want to ask you a tough question that came in from Ferris, who it doesn't say where he is, but I love this question. So I'd love to ask you, because it kind of fits with what you're sharing, which is one of the things we all want to get is high productivity, right?
Yes.
So how do you get higher productivity without burnout?
Yeah. And that's a great question, because it's so, I think there's so many, everywhere we look, right, we're hit with productivity hacks and techniques and all of these things to be hyper productive. Right. But research shows that beyond a certain threshold, our productivity and our ability to be creative and our ability to produce great work actually diminishes when we push ourselves too much. So it's about really figuring out, and I talk about this in my book, the first chapter is called Pace for Performance. So really figuring out where is that sweet spot in your stretch zone, I call it. So it's not your comfort zone, but it's not your stress zone, but where right in that sweet spot where you can say right in that stretch where you're still stretching yourself and you're being very productive, but you're not overly taxing yourself to the point where you're going to exhaust yourself by overperforming or staying too far in that stretch zone. So finding where that sweet spot is in terms of stress, in terms of challenge, and what you put your energy into. Because ultimately, I think if you can channel these resources, you're going to actually be more productive, especially if you can figure out what that sweet spot is.
Love that. I mean, what you're making me think about is yoga. When I had one of my painful periods of burnout in my life, which is another story for another time, but I had a real issue with back pain, sitting too long, working too long, whatever. And yoga taught me a really deep lesson about what you're pointing to, stretch, like stretch to the point where you feel it,
Yes.
but not to the point where it hurts you. And learning that sweet spot is a lesson for your body, for your heart, and for your head. And so I love that you're pointing to that. It's like that's one of the goals I think we as coaches look to do with our clients, right? What's your growth edge?
Exactly.
But don't go over it.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm. And if you do go over it, how do you replenish and
how do you come back? Right.
Yeah. How do you identify that you went over and then do other things because sometimes we can't. If we're an entrepreneur or we're doing some big project, we will have to stretch. There are moments where we are going to have to go into the stress zone. So how do we come back to that by counterbalancing it with behaviors or skills as well? So we have both ends. We know where our sweet spot is, but if we end up having to go into the stress zone, we can bring ourselves back and replenish.
That's great. That's awesome. Mm-hmm. So Jacinta, we have a couple more minutes. I'm going to put you on the spot. How's that?
Okay.
In a very short, like I watched one of these NPR shows and I can't remember the host, but he's like, in 8 words or less, one of those kind of things, right? So, but you have a global audience and what you're talking about is really powerful. So in very, very short, what's the message you want people to take away from your book and your work?
I just want to take people to take away, like going back to what burnout comes from. It's from a mismatch between our capacities as humans and the nature of our work. So I think of it like a scale, right? Or a seesaw. Yeah. And we need to be able to lean into our human capabilities. Humans are naturally highly resilient beings. We have survived for centuries, and we have these core capabilities that have allowed us to thrive and survive as a species for centuries. But if we try to avoid being human to fit into the nature of our work, or hyper-connected, stepping into overdrive constantly, we deny these human aspects of us, and the scale gets tipped. So if we can lean into going back to these human capacities that have allowed us to thrive for centuries, how we think, how we behave, how we relate to others, how we manage our emotions, how we replenish our physical reserves, and we have them all in us. They just need to be brought out, dusted off, shined, tuned up. We are going to be much more resilient and much better equipped to navigate all the uncertain changes we have in our future world of work and our future world. So that's the message I would leave everyone with.
I love it. I'm totally in sync and in alignment with that. And I think that it's what you're saying is that we have it already in us. We already know. A lot of what we're doing here is remembering our core humanity. So I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be our premier guest on our new initiative, the CoachX Conversations. It's been really wonderful to talk to you and to get to know you. And I'm excited to tell everyone to get this wonderful book that comes out on March 9th, right?
Yes, March 9th.
So thank you so much for joining us, and welcome everyone to this new initiative, CoachX Conversations with the Institute of Coaching. I will be back on February 17th with a really cool conversation with Paul Zak, neuroscientist and expert in neuromanagement. And my amazing colleague, Carol Kaufman, will be here next week on Wednesday, February 3rd, with the renowned psychologist, Richard Boyack.